It is my privilege to be the opposition's lead speaker today in providing the opposition's budget reply contribution. Mr. Speaker, I want to firstly begin by acknowledging the Treasurer for his contribution to our state. I think it is important to do so and to thank him and his officials and staff for their development of this budget. It is an important role, and while there are many aspects of our state's policy platform in this budget that we may not agree on, equally there are many things that we do agree on. And I work collaboratively with the Treasurer on numerous things and thank him for that. As I did in my contribution to last year's budget, I want to highlight some things that it is critically important that the opposition and the government support one another on. There are a range of things in this budget that we acknowledge, we are grateful to see in the budget, and that are important to build South Australia's future. No more so than support for the AUKUS agreement, which is a nation-building initiative, an initiative so important for our nation's security that it is too significant to fail. We will work hand in hand, where appropriate, with the government in the fulfilment of South Australia's contribution to AUKUS, acknowledging the very significant challenges that face our state, that face this government, that face future governments with regard to the heavy lifting required by South Australia. But I do think it is important to put on the record that while we will carefully scrutinise the journey towards South Australia's contribution to AUKUS, we do support, with a high degree of bipartisanship, that final outcome, that South Australia, as a jurisdiction, plays an incredibly significant role in our nation's security and also will gain very significant economic development opportunities if we can rise to this occasion. The Premier has rightfully identified significant challenges, particularly with regard to skills, and there will be others along the way, but this opposition will work appropriately and hand in hand with the government as we move towards that. The Premier and I have both had the opportunity to visit AUKUS-related sites in the United Kingdom, myself, over recent days. And each time I have visited, and I believe the Premier shares this view, we have seen the momentous challenge that will be required by this state. This budget begins to respond to those challenges, both with infrastructure contributions and also skills development opportunities. More will be needed in the future. The opposition will highlight those things where appropriate, but it is good to see this budget make the start of that contribution. Mr. Speaker, another area of significant bipartisan support that we will offer this government is around the Northern Water Initiative, renamed by the government as the State Prosperity Plan. This is a significant nation-building project for our state. It was initiated under the previous Liberal government, and we will work with the government as they seek to fulfil the potential that Northern Water has. There are aspects of that initiative which require more scrutiny over time, particularly with regard to hydrogen, but in terms of unleashing the potential of the resources sector in the heart of our state, this is an initiative worth pursuing, and it is good to see this initiative supported in the budget as well. Other initiatives around business events, skills, housing, interchange upgrades at Mount Barker, just a few of the things that we think are worth highlighting as worthy aspects of the state's budget. It is important that the opposition provides support to these sorts of initiatives. We cannot be an opposition for the sake of opposition, whinging and carping at every initiative of the government. And while often what is projected through the media for justifiable reasons are points of disagreement, it is important to stand here today and highlight that there are many times when governments and oppositions agree. They have conversations about how that agreement can be forged, and they deliver a degree of bipartisanship which is future-focused for our state. Mr. Speaker, it is, however, important for me as leader of the opposition to highlight the areas of difference between the opposition and the government when it comes to this budget. And we do believe that there are a range of areas where this budget misses the mark. I want to talk about those areas while providing various areas of focus that we would have if we occupied the Treasury benches, which were different. Mr. Speaker, the 2024 state budget is Labour's third budget since being elected to office. And in many ways, I would characterise it as a budget from the Witherall era. A budget which too often treads water, fails to respond to some of the significant challenges of our times, and which is unfortunately backed up by media and social media spin. It shines a light, I believe, into a government which has missed some significant opportunities and feeds a fairly narrow base of vested interests, while perhaps failing to respond significantly to the needs of some of South Australia's most at-need groups. One thing that is for certain is that this is a government which believes that all it needs to do is throw money at problems rather than and spend money telling people it's throwing money at problems rather than taking on some significant reforms. As an opposition, we believe that reform opportunities are particularly being missed when it comes to taxation reforms, reforms within our health sector, and reforms within the area of energy security in South Australia. The government, I believe, is reform shy, preferring to keep its head in the sand when it comes to some of those bigger issues that confront the state. The government is happy to take credit for good news, but it ignores, distracts, or disappears when bad news confronts our state. We know there are significant global headwinds confronting Australia and South Australia at the moment. The Treasurer alluded to those in his budget speech. The good times can't continue, and unfortunately it appears that this budget, through borrowing, attempts to sustain those good times closer towards the 2026 state election, while failing to grasp some of those key areas for reform. When a reporter or a commentator makes negative comments about this state, we don't tend to hear about it from the government. We don't get a response. But when there's a positive contribution from a commentator or analyst, it gets trumpeted loudly from social media and media releases. You only need to take a look at the Premier's social media platforms to see that in full flight. But, Mr. Speaker, there are tough times increasingly approaching South Australia, and in many ways they're already here. We know that the average South Australian household is some $20,000 worse off than they were just 18 months ago. Shame. That is a combination of higher interest rates, energy bills, groceries, fuels and other essentials that people have no way of avoiding spending their hard-earned money on. It's difficult for people to get a hold of an extra $20,000 a year. That can mean very significant sacrifices. But in some cases, it can mean losing businesses or losing their homes. Some of these issues have global contributions that have resulted in that additional expenditure needing to be achieved by the average household. However, Some of those challenges are homegrown, and we know that inflation in Australia is increasingly homegrown by significant expenditure at both federal and state levels. Mr. Speaker, there is a gulf between the Premier's social media mirage and life on the ground in the communities that I come across as I travel around our suburbs and regions. Just take a recent post on the Premier's Facebook page, trumpeting and presumably taking credit for the comparative economic outlook, which ranks South Australia favourably against other jurisdictions. The comments under the Premier's post were telling. I find that a little hard to believe, mate. Really? Talk to a small business owner. Cost of living is killing all of us. Pop up Pete's Fantasyland. I think he's breathing too much hydrogen. This bloke's lost touch with the public. They are on a completely different planet. These statements show the government's tenure when it comes to what everyday South Australians are enduring. Life is hard at the moment, and the government will be well advised to dial back the arrogance on the social media platforms and show a little empathy. Mr. Speaker, it is incredibly important for political parties of any ideological persuasion to be very clear in 2024 about what and who they stand for. The Liberal Party of South Australia must be clear about those things. Be upfront with South Australians that if elected, we will govern for everyone, but there are particular groups who can expect us to have their backs. There are particular groups of people who can expect us to be their strong voice and advocate within the Parliament and when leading this state. It is also important that those groups and the broader community know exactly what the Liberal Party of South Australia stands for, knows what our values are. Mr. Speaker, we will be the party of opportunity, forging pathways where people can be proud of investing a little bit of their money, a bit of their energy, a bit of their skill to get ahead, to create opportunity for themselves, perhaps a little bit of wealth for themselves, for family members, for their community, through the creation of economic activity, through the creation of jobs. We must be the party of opportunity. We must be the party of freedom, the party that acknowledges that people have inherent potential to get ahead, and they don't necessarily need the government to give them a hand out at every step of the way. We don't want people to be addicted to government handouts. We want people to stand on their own 2 feet, and I believe that it is inherent in the human psyche that they want to do that themselves as well. We value people and their freedom beyond identity politics, and we have to avoid the cancer of identity politics, which I believe is paralysing modern democracies across the Western world. It shouldn't matter your gender, your sexuality, your socioeconomic status. It shouldn't matter your race, which is why we are so strongly opposed to race-based politics as characterised by the proposed voice to federal parliament and, of course, this state voice, which was initiated here in South Australia, I believe, against the wishes of many South Australians. We must avoid identity politics and the victimhood that is injected into identity politics, which potentially keeps people addicted to government support. Instead, valuing the individual, lifting them up and giving them pathways to opportunity and success, pathways to freedom. We must be the party of home ownership. The dream of home ownership is slipping away from too many Australians under the age of 40. And we must keep that dream alive, because we know when Australians invest in a home, when they buy their home, they invest in a community as well. They invest in the local school. They invest in the local parks. They invest in local sporting clubs. They invest psychologically. They invest spiritually. They invest financially. Home ownership is an incredible part of the Australian dream, and having your little patch of Australia is an important part of that. There is nothing wrong with renting. There is absolutely nothing wrong with renting, and we need to look for ways to support renters as well. But pathways to home ownership for people from all walks of life is so critically important. That is why we put on the table a couple of weeks ago our policies around stamp duty reform. And we were pleased to see the government make a decision in this budget to remove the upper threshold for access to stamp duty relief for first home buyers of newly constructed homes. But we do believe there is need for some relief for homeowners, first homeowners making that initial decision to buy an established home, because we know that is the vast majority of homeowners. The vast majority of first homeowners start off with a small unit, and that is something we need to provide some support for as well. So that is why we have made the decision to take to the 2026 election, unless it is committed to before that by the government. It doesn't appear that it will be. We have taken the decision to provide stamp duty relief up to $10,000 to first homeowners who decide to purchase an existing home within our state. And it is so important to acknowledge and to highlight that we are now, in fact, the only jurisdiction which does not have that relief in place for existing properties. And we do need to align to other states. We do need to keep the dream of home ownership alive. Mr. Speaker, we want to be the party of the family, and that can take many different forms in 2024, many different forms. But we believe that the family, in whatever form that it takes, is the best place to raise children, and is best to raise children, and is the best place to make decisions for children and for the communities in which those families are located. In the coming months, we'll have a lot more to say about the child protection system, and I'm working with the member for Heist and the Shadow Minister for Child Protection on ideas that will build more resilient families and will work to keep families together. Families are important, Mr. Speaker, and we must be the party of the family. We must be the party of less government intervention, less government bureaucracy, and as an extension of that, the party of less taxation. That is why we have put on the table the payroll tax policy, which would see the payroll tax threshold in South Australia rise from $1.5 million to $2.1 million and exempt trainees and apprentices from the calculation towards payroll tax thresholds as well. These are important policies to support small and medium-sized businesses in our state. They are powerful policies that will release many businesses in this state who have found themselves unexpectedly paying payroll tax due to wages growth across our nation. It will free them from this payroll tax, able to take some of that money home and, importantly, invest some of that into their business to grow in other ways. It is perverse that payroll tax is a handbrake on business growth in this state, on the employment of people in jobs that could transform their lives. I hear time and time again people who decide to sell components of their business or not grow their business at all because it will push them into the payroll tax thresholds. That, Mr. Speaker, means it is a tax on jobs, it is a tax on opportunity, and it is a tax which actually hurts vulnerable people who do not have job opportunities, perhaps more than business owners in themselves. Mr. Speaker, I said a moment ago, it is so important that any political party governs for all South Australians, but is very clear about the people that they specifically stand for, the people who we will advocate for if fortunate enough to form government. In the case of the Liberal Party, we will be the greatest advocates you will find for small and family businesses in this state. We have a heritage of being the party of small business, and we must ensure we are continually the party of small business. That means the party of our tradies, the party of apprentices, people who aspire to create small businesses of the future, the party of startups, the party of entrepreneurs. We must be clear about that. We must be signalling to those people that we are the party for them, we are the party for their families, we are the party for their employees. Mr. Speaker, those are the people who we stand for. We respect them for their contribution to our state, and we acknowledge that they take their work home with them every single night. Small businesses are not 9-to-5 jobs. Small businesses are at the dining room table. Small businesses are in the bedroom, they're in the backyard, they're on the school run. Small businesses dominate the lives of small business owners. That can be a good thing in the good times when a passion is being turned into a source of income. But when things get tough, it can be incredibly difficult. And that is why small business needs to be able to rely on a party within this building that will have their backs and be their voice. Mr. Speaker, we are the party of regional South Australia. Yeah. We must be clear about this. We must continually advocate for our regions. We must visit our regions. We must build up knowledge and understanding of our regions in order to represent those regions effectively. There is no such place really as regional South Australia. There are many different communities that are not homogenous. Communities which have different challenges and shared challenges. Those shared challenges wrap around the tyranny of distance and access to resources and services, often government services. However, there are many, many benefits of living in regional South Australia as well. They are beautiful places. They are places with high degrees of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. Regional South Australia lifts well above its weight, not just from an economic point of view, but in terms of contributing to the very fabric and DNA of South Australia. We are the party of regional communities. We are the party of our farmers, the party of our food and fibre producers. We know that in recent years many of our farmers have had good times, and we celebrate that with them. But we know that is a cyclical process, and with challenges around our climate and the variability of our climate, there is no doubt difficult times on the horizons. My signal is that to our food and fibre producers across our state, we are there for you. We're the party of our veterans, people who have served our nation. We must be their voice. Too often they return from service or from training with significant challenges. Challenges obtained in their personal lives as a result of serving their nation. And that extends to their families as well. We must be their voice. We are the party, I believe, of our multicultural communities, the party that will stand up for their faith, their stories, their customs, their traditions, their languages. Multicultural communities, migrants give so much to South Australia, and almost everyone in our parliament can trace their families back a couple of generations, maybe 6 or 7, not many more than that. We're a nation of migrants, we're a state of migrants. It is what makes our state such a great place, and we must ensure that they feel comfortable, that what they bring to Australia is supported, celebrated and protected. Mr. Speaker, across all those different categories of certain groups that I've highlighted that the Liberal Party stands for, above all, we stand for people who want to work hard, want to invest in our communities and want to give back to Australia and South Australia. We want to reward merit, we want to reward the ethic of work, and we want to ensure that people who do that feel rewarded and can continue to do so. Mr. Speaker, that frames what the Liberal Party stands for, and some of the groups we will particularly support through our policy agenda. And I want to reflect particularly on some areas of focus that we think that the government isn't necessarily responding to from a reformist point of view, and that this budget did not necessarily support as it should have. Mr. Speaker, our health system is in crisis. There's no doubt about that. And it was not the Liberal Party that set the metric in the lead up to the 2022 state election that we would fix the ramping crisis. That was the Labour Party's metric, and it was a decision that they took to create an impression in the state of South Australia that they had a silver bullet to fix the ramping crisis.
Shame.
Now, I could go through lots of statistics today. I'll only go through one at the moment. That is that in February 2022, some 1,500 hours were lost by our paramedics and patients to the hospital ramp in South Australia. In the month of May 2024, the most recent recordable month of ramping statistics in this state, that figure has stood at close to 5,000 hours, Mr. Speaker. That figure, that statistic, is translated into real people. It's translated into vulnerable patients in ambulances waiting for care, and it is translated into paramedics and other clinicians struggling to do their jobs in the face of ramping being out of control. Our emergency departments are too often on code white. Our hospital system is too often in code yellow, in a permanent state of emergency, in a permanent state of crisis. Mr. Speaker, I do not believe that this is just about throwing money at the problem. We welcome additional funding for hospital infrastructure and hospital personnel. That is needed. But it is clear something more is needed, because money is not moving the dial when it comes to outcomes. Outcomes are going dramatically backwards across a range of metrics. We need more than that. We need system reform. There are particular areas which the opposition would focus on. I have outlined them before, and I will briefly touch on them today, because they weren't focused on in this state budget as much as I would not only have liked, but as much as I thought they would have been. I was surprised that our mental health system in South Australia did not get more attention from this state budget. I was genuinely surprised by the budget papers, which announced an additional $5 million or so over the next half a decade in mental health support, when we know that we need tens of millions of dollars of additional support in our mental health system in this state. That is known as our mental health's unmet need. The Shadow Minister for Mental Health and myself have been focused relentlessly on this, working with the sector, and we've made a very clear commitment that if elected, we will work to meet the unmet need in our mental health system. What does that unmet need look like? Well, it looks like almost 20,000 patients not getting access to the support and services that they need. That is 20,000 people with family members and with other people in their communities who are also vulnerable because of their mental health challenges. Vulnerable in terms of their safety, and too often we see that bubble out in the public domain, but also vulnerable in terms of coming up with ways to support family members and friends and other contacts, even colleagues at times, in a way that they don't feel equipped to do, and which they're quite frankly simply not able to or qualified to do. Mr. Speaker, the unmet need in this state's mental health system is a disgrace, a crisis, and this opposition is determined to work towards fulfilling that unmet need. We're working with stakeholders, particularly the Mental Health Coalition of South Australia, to understand how that unmet need can be fulfilled, what that looks like in terms of the distribution of infrastructure and personnel on the ground, so that we can provide to South Australians a robust mental health policy platform over the coming weeks, months and years. Mr. Speaker, the role of the general practitioner in South Australia is a critical role. It's a critical role across the whole of our country, and we know that too often our GPs are not feeling supported, not feeling protected in their jobs, not feeling celebrated. Not that they do the job to be celebrated, but across a gamut of reasons, GPs are leaving the sector or choosing not to follow that profession in the first place. We have to do immense work in building up the traditional role of the GP, ensuring that there are enough GPs in metropolitan Adelaide and regional South Australia, because the further you get from Adelaide, the problem which is present in Adelaide just gets worse and worse and worse. And we know in some regions, I highlight the Eyre Peninsula in particular, it is almost impossible to find a GP within an acceptable time frame. We need to work alongside GPs to provide them with support and to ensure that they have access to the resources that they need to do their job. We need to look for ways that we can get out of their way and give them the freedom to do their job appropriately and in a financially viable way as well. And we know that the state government's decision to charge payroll tax to general practitioners is a potentially threatening situation for the viability, the sustainability of many general practitioners across our state. A decision by the government taken in the lead up to this budget to exempt bulk billing GPs from payroll tax was a welcome decision, but it is the opposition's very firm view and the firm view of many general practitioners and their representatives across this state that that simply didn't go far enough. So, Mr. Speaker, I can signal today that if elected in 2026, the Liberal Party will broaden that exemption to include all GP consultations, not just bulk billing consultations, but all GP consultations, to ensure that there is no situation where GPs are having to charge between $10 and $20 more for a consultation, which could put a significant number of people off going to see their GP, could threaten the very viability of GP practices across our state, and as a consequence could push people towards the hospital ramp, towards the emergency department, and towards a situation of vulnerability that we believe is simply unacceptable. Our general practitioners in South Australia deserve our support. We will be the voice for general practitioners in this state, and we will exempt them from this payroll tax decision. Mr. Speaker, South Australia is not as safe as it should be. Across a whole range of categories of crime, South Australians are enduring more crime than they have in recent years. There may be many reasons for that, and some people ascribe the cost of living crisis to that, but that cannot be used as an excuse. No government, and the government hasn't done this, nor will I, no government or aspiring government should ascribe soaring crime rates to cost of living challenges. It is not acceptable to put that excuse on the table, and the Liberal Party will not. Instead, we need to find ways to fight crime and to discourage crime. And the opposition is incredibly focused on working with stakeholders, including the South Australian Police and their representative bodies, organisations like Neighbourhood Watch and Crime Stoppers, to ensure that we get in front of this crime wave that is grabbing hold of particular parts of our state. South Australia's police force has endured considerable pain in recent years. Our policemen and women were asked to do things that they never signed up to do during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the morale within the police force is shattered. Those things were unexpected, and there were a range of reasons for those. But with morale so low, too many people are leaving our police force. Too many senior officers, too many officers with very significant experience, too many officers who are mentors to younger officers. With too many good police officers leaving the police force, The secondary problem that we're facing is the pipeline of new recruits is far too insignificant. The number coming in the front door as others leave through the back door simply is not sustainable. Our police force is around 200 police officers short of where it needs to be to have a full complement of active police in this state. But in fact, our police force could easily do with several hundred more police officers to reach a point where it can work towards a sustainable level of policing which ensures that morale is high and mentoring across the police force is sustainable as well. Headline funds in the budget for a digital police station and telephone resolution capability are, quite frankly, embarrassing at best. This should be core business within our police force, not something to shout from the rooftops. We need more police on the beat, not a website. And across our state, our police force is exhausted and stretching to breaking point. We need incentives on the table to encourage people to stay in the force through pay and conditions and to attract police officers to South Australia from interstate and in particular overseas. We know that there have been successful overseas recruitment processes in the past. We know that there is a seemingly quite successful recruitment process flagged at the moment. We need to make sure that the proof is in the pudding with regard to that recruitment process. The officers stay in the force once they become part of it, and that they commit to a fulfilling career as police officers in this state. We also need to appropriately resource our policing, no more so than in regional South Australia. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Mr. Speaker, South Australia is currently navigating the energy trilemma: energy security, emissions reduction, and energy affordability. And things are not going well in this state as we attempt to navigate that trilemma. Households are nearly $700 worse off per annum, and small businesses more than $1,250 worse off since Labor was elected to office in this state. The former Liberal government reduced power prices by over $400, with the situation quickly, but perhaps unsurprisingly, unravelling since the change of government. The Liberal Party supports a sensible pathway towards emissions reduction, but we believe that achieving net zero by 2050 is currently impossible in Australia without dramatic advancements in technological solutions or the deployment of a nuclear energy strategy for our nation. The Labor government at both state and federal level have taken a very different approach to the challenge of energy security, emissions reduction and affordability, with the holy grail of hydrogen being touted as a saviour. While the Liberal Party acknowledges that hydrogen is a fuel of the future, we simply don't know what this looks like, nor when in the future it will eventuate. While I said earlier we support the Labor government's Northern Water initiative and many of the other outcomes that could very well be spurred by that investment, the Labor Party's pursuit of their hydrogen power plant in the Upper Spencer Gulf region has too many question marks above its financial viability, its delivery dates, and its ability to deliver the outcomes that we expect for it, for us to actively support. One thing we do know, by the government and the Premier's own admission, it will not reduce energy prices in South Australia. Shame. And I fear, having talked to industry stakeholders across our state, nation and the globe, that this could end up being a white elephant in our state. Mr. Speaker, in my 2023 budget reply speech, I canvassed, in light of the groundbreaking AUKUS agreement and with nuclear-powered submarines being built in South Australia in the coming decades, it would be prudent to undertake the serious consideration of the establishment of a civil nuclear energy programme in our state through the possible reopening or a second chapter of the scarce Royal Commission into the nuclear fuel cycle. It has been 8 years since the final report of the Royal Commission, and technological advancements and the broader acceptance of nuclear energy as a low emissions and stable energy source have seen a change in the mood within the community over that time. Today, Mr. Speaker, I can announce that if elected in 2026, a Liberal government will establish a Royal Commission into the creation of a civil nuclear energy sector in South Australia. This could include undertaking a review of the milestones approach as set out by the International Atomic Energy Agency and supporting guidance to ensure that the state is well informed about the process should the federal prohibition on nuclear energy be removed. This is about nuclear readiness, and we would refer to this Royal Commission as South Australia's Royal Commission on Nuclear Readiness. The review could investigate the economics and system costs for the South Australian energy grid, as well as any other economic opportunities a civilian industry would provide for the overall South Australian economy. Countries looking to introduce civil nuclear power are guided by the IAEA Milestones publication, which requires approximately 10 years of preparatory work to the first reactor coming online. This work needs to be done now because things could change in the future. Those could be technological advancements with regard to small modular reactors. They could be significant changes in public mood, and we believe that public mood is already swinging significantly in that direction. It could be a realisation by the Labour Party that they've got this all wrong. Whatever the reason, we should be prepared for this, and now is the time to begin that work. Critics in Labour argue cost barriers and lack of Australian-based skills in nuclear energy are the reasons we cannot advance this work. I would counter that there are likely more barriers to the success of Labour's experimental hydrogen frolic than there are to proven nuclear technologies currently in place right across the globe. It is time for Australia to mature in our relationship with the nuclear fuel cycle, and with the AUKUS deal advancing in a way that I think most South Australians and certainly most parliamentarians are exceptionally proud of, there is surely no better time to move towards a nuclear readiness future. Mr. Speaker, I have already mentioned in my contribution today that South Australians' regions give so much to our state. They produce world-class food and fibre, provide us with amazing destinations which attract visitors from all over the world, and are an amazing place to call home. Since becoming leader of the Liberal Party of South Australia, I have travelled the length and breadth of our state many times over, visiting Mount Gambier 10 times, the Limestone Coast region 12 times, the Eyre Peninsula and the Riverland 5 times, and the Upper Spencer Gulf region some 8 times. These numbers alone are, however, meaningless because it is the depth and quality of the visits that matter. Almost all of my trips to regional South Australia have been overnight visits, some up to 3 nights. They have involved meeting with local business owners, with community champions, with progress associations, with agricultural bureaus, with RDAs, with local councils, mayors and council CEOs, with tourism operators, with farmers in their paddocks. Mr. Speaker, respecting regional South Australia means turning up. It means turning up for longer than it takes to have a selfie taken in a paddock and heading back to Adelaide in your shiny RM Williams boots. Mr. Speaker, it means building real relationships. Relationships very different than our Premier is willing to build in regional South Australia. It means being their voice and their advocate and turning up again and again and again. Mr. Speaker, I signal very clear policy directions today that the Liberal Party is setting out for regional growth, regional roads and regional policing. We should be ambitious for growth in regional South Australia. Our regional cities should and can be bigger than they currently are, but they can only grow with the corresponding health, transport, housing and educational infrastructure developed and rolled out alongside any population growth plan. These should also be shaped by economic imperatives tailored to specific regions along the way. I have asked the Shadow Minister for Regional Population Growth, Sam Telfer, to develop a plan for regional population growth across our state. And we will work with local councils and other stakeholders to ensure that our growth targets and strategies are both realistic and meet the needs, expectations and ambitions of our regional communities. We have seen a debacle unfold far too close to Adelaide when regional population planning is not achieved well. And that has happened just up the Southeastern Freeway in the town of Mount Barker. This is a case study in regional planning done poorly, and we cannot have that occur in this state again. It cannot happen in our peri-urban communities, and it cannot happen in our truly regional communities. It must not happen in the Fleurieu Peninsula, around the communities of Encounter Bay, Victor Harbour, Port Elliot, Middleton and Goolwa. The announcement that Goolwa is to absorb several thousand additional homes over the coming years, in some ways could be welcomed by that community, but not if it's not backed up by appropriate community infrastructure. And I'm working with the member for Finnis to explore policy solutions for his region in particular, because that is the next Mount Barker brought to us by the Labour government if we do not get that right. Mr. Speaker, hand in hand with regional population growth, but also not even attached to regional population growth because the importance is so current, is the need to invest in our regional roads. And if elected in 2026, the Liberal Party of South Australia will spend more on regional roads than the Labour government. We will spend more on regional road construction, and we will spend more on regional road maintenance. When I travel around regional South Australia, the top two issues raised with me are regional health, and I've talked today about some of the things we would do in health service provision across the state, and we have a Shadow Minister for Regional Health in this Shadow Cabinet providing a clear signal that regional health will be at the heart of our health solutions for this state. But the second most common thing I hear raised in regional South Australia is the condition and viability of our regional roads. We need to invest more in our regional roads. We need people travelling to and from our regions, travelling across our regions, moving freight in and out of our regions. We need them to be able to do so confidently, that they can return home to their families, and we also need them to do so in a way that enhances productivity of our regions as well. Our regional roads are not up to scratch. We have commenced a community engagement campaign called Report Your Road SA. I've been working on that with the Honourable Nicola Centofanti and the Honourable Ben Hood and Adrian Pederick in this place to ensure that we have a good understanding of where the investment is needed, where the community expects the investment to be made, and where our roads need to be improved urgently from a safety point of view. The Liberal Party of South Australia is the party of regional roads. We will invest more in regional roads. Mr. Speaker, there are too many regional police stations which are closed today. Their doors are shut, the shutters are down, there is a sign out the front, but there are no police officers operating in them. The member for Chaffey continually raises concerns in his Riverland community about police stations which are not operating at capacity. We know that there are many examples of police stations without officers in charge on the Eyre Peninsula and in the southeast of our state. Regional policing needs to be respected, it needs to be supported, it needs to be promoted once again as a career of choice, which it is not at the moment, because police recruits and police graduates know that if you end up in regional South Australia, it is a lonely, unforgiving job too often. We need to get back to the role of the regional police officer. In the same way, as I've alluded to, we need to get back to the role of the traditional regional general practitioner. Too often these roles have been forgotten, they've been allowed to wither on the vine, and the Liberal Party of South Australia will work alongside the Police Association of this state to define what a regional police officer looks like, the resources they need, and the investment that is needed in our regional policing infrastructure to ensure that our regions are safe places to call home. Regional South Australia matters to this party, and we will be the party that invests in our regions, not ignores our regions. Mr. Speaker, South Australia's levels of debt are of exceptional concern and growing concern to too many South Australians. South Australian businesses understand what it means to carry too much debt. Increasingly, South Australian households are feeling the pain of carrying too much debt. And that pain will soon be exacerbated as opportunities are limited for people in this state, particularly future generations, if we do not get a debt reduction strategy in place for South Australia. The Liberal Party has always been the party that has an eye to debt reduction. And there have been times when debt is good, when debt is useful, when cheap debt has enabled this state to grow. It occurred under the leadership of Thomas Playford, and it occurred under the leadership of Stephen Marshall. There is opportunity to build this state and to create nation-building and state-building infrastructure when debt levels and borrowing rates are low. But we're getting to the point, Mr. Speaker, where South Australia's debt levels are painfully high, and the handbrake on future generations is becoming scary. It is imperative that in the coming budget in 2025, that our State Treasurer outlines a debt reduction strategy for this state. The Liberal opposition will certainly be putting on the table strategies for debt reduction into the medium term, because there are many reasons to borrow today. There will always be many reasons to borrow. There will always be more reasons to borrow more. But unless we have an eye to debt reduction in the future, we will be punishing future generations by saddling them with generational debt, which may end up unaffordable and unsustainable. The Liberal Party has a reputation for responsible economic management. That is what South Australians expect of us, but it shouldn't just be for us to do that. There is a key role going forward for the government to outline how it's going to get the expenditure of government departments under control. In the last two budgets, we have seen outrageous overspending by government departments. Their budgets are not even guidelines for their expenditure programs anymore. They spend, the debt is forgiven, and they spend again. We saw it in the 2023 budgetary period, we've seen it in the 2024 budgetary period, and it seems to be projected as a method of doing business by our government agencies and our chief executives well into the future. There is a fiscal ill-discipline built into this budget, and we must stop forgiving poor fiscal behaviour, poor fiscal discipline, and start seeing strategies in place for pushing down our debt levels in this state. We cannot continue in this trajectory. $44 billion worth of debt on the books headed into 2028. But will it be 44? With the budget overruns that we've seen in the last couple of years, it will end up much, much higher than that. It will push $50 billion based on this trajectory by next year's budget, I am sure. This is scary for our state. It is time that this government started to employ the principles of sound money, acting like a household or a small business, getting their house in order so that future generations are not saddled with levels of debt that are simply unsustainable. Mr. Speaker, I highlighted a range of issues in this budget that we agree with, because we are not going to provide opposition for the sake of opposition. I've highlighted what this party stands for and who we seek to provide high levels of advocacy for. And, Mr. Speaker, I have outlined some of the areas of deep concern that we've got for this budget and policy proposals that we will take to the 2026 state election and beyond. We're a serious opposition, Mr. Speaker. We are doing significant policy development in an active and energetic shadow cabinet. We are engaging with peak bodies and stakeholders from every corner of this state. And over the coming months, as we get closer to the 2026 election, we will build on the themes that I've outlined today, the specific policies that I've outlined today, and take a policy platform that reforms this state around the principles and values that you should expect of a Liberal Party in this state and this nation. I commend the opposition's approach to the House and look forward to hearing from my colleagues as they make their contributions over the coming hours.
Hear, hear.